Hi there, I'm digital anchor Brandy Smith. It is a somber morning in Houston as we say goodbye to Senior Officer William Bill Jeffrey, a more than 30-year veteran of the force. He was just 54 years old when he was shot and killed in the line of duty last week, serving an arrest warrant in Northeast Houston. We're giving you a live look from Air 11 of the procession that just began from Klein Funeral Home in Tomball. It will make its way down to Grace Church, Houston, along the Gulf Freeway. This procession is expected to take about an hour. Then the funeral service for Officer Jeffrey will begin at 10 o'clock this morning. For those of you who are maybe getting ready for work, wondering about what this route looks like, or if you want to pay your respects to Officer Jeffrey as he makes his way to the funeral home, I want to run down the route for you. So it is heading west on Main Street in Tomball, then it will head south on 249 before hopping on the Sam Houston Tollway. It'll loop around all the way to the Gulf Freeway, shoot south, and then they'll exit on Dixie Farm Road before they arrive at Grace Church, Houston. It's been an emotional week for HPD and for the family of Officer Jeffrey. We have heard from his daughter, from his former partner, from Chief Finner, from Mayor Sylvester Turner, expressing what a loss this is for the department. Again, Officer Jeffrey was just shy of 31 years on the force. He was 54 years old. He had been assigned to the Major Offenders Division, and Chief Finner described him as the best of the best. Now, while we watch this procession, I want you to hear from his daughter, Lacey Jeffrey, about the memories she has of her father and the legacy he leaves behind.
His laugh, he was very loud. Anyone that knew him, you would hear him from a mile away. I just want everyone to know that he was an amazing man that would have done anything for this city, and that this city lost their absolute best police officer today.
He lived for his job. He loved to protect the city.
He absolutely loved to protect the city, but he loved his family more than anything. He was GB, Grandpa Bill, and my daughter is going to miss him every single day. I want everyone to strive to be just like him. I want everyone to follow in his footsteps and to spend every moment that they are in this city protecting it the way that they should, and I want them to be more careful than he was. But I want everyone to know that he was a leader and to remember everything that he stood for. I'm going to miss him every single day for the rest of my life. And his friends and his family and his teammates are going to miss him every day for the rest of his life. He was a one-of-a-kind man. Everyone knew him, everybody loved him. The bad guys not so much, but everyone that knew him loved him. He was supposed to come and see me in Austin this week. He was supposed to come watch my daughter for me, because I had things to do. He was supposed to be here this week. The last thing he told me is, "I'll see you sometime this week, I love you." And now I don't ever get to see him again.
Just incredibly emotional, but so strong. That is one of the things that Chief Finner has talked about the Jeffrey family, that Mayor Sylvester Turner has talked about the family, showing incredible strength. That was the day her father died. That was last Monday when we heard from Lacey Jeffrey. He left behind his daughter, also a wife. A little later, I want you to hear from his former partner, Chris Helton, about the kind of guy he was. You heard Lacey talk about his laugh, and that's another characteristic we've heard repeated by those who knew him well. He just had a laugh that would fill up the room, that you could hear from a distance. We are giving you a live look from Air 11 at this procession, again, as it makes its way from Tomball from Klein Funeral Home. There you see the route down to Grace Church. So I believe they're on 249 right now, shooting south. They'll hit Beltway 8 and loop around to the Gulf Freeway. And then right off the Gulf Freeway, they will take the Dixie Farm exit and loop around to Grace Church. This is an opportunity for folks throughout Houston to pay their respects. If there's somewhere along that route where you can park safely and salute a fallen officer who lost his life a week ago today. That funeral is set to begin at 10 a.m. Before it does, at the end of this procession, officers from HPD's Major Offenders Division, the division for which Officer Jeffrey served, along with honor guards, will escort his casket inside, and then they are going to stand guard until the service begins at 10 a.m. After that service, we're told he will receive full police honors. The public is welcome at Grace Church Houston, but there are going to be COVID-19 restrictions. That's why it's encouraged that you watch online. HPD will provide a feed of that. We will also be providing a look inside that funeral service when we expect to hear from HPD Chaplain Vincent Johnson. Chief Troy Finner will speak, Assistant Chief Ernest Garcia, Mayor Sylvester Turner, and Major Offenders Division Commander Ronald Boza will all be involved in the funeral service, which is set to begin here in about 4 hours. After the service, police will escort Officer Jeffrey back to Klein Funeral Home in Tomball, but this time they're going to take a different route. They're going to take I-45 straight through Houston. The official motorcade will end at Houston Avenue, and then a small group will continue to Tomball, but that is another opportunity for you to pay your respects to this officer who served the city of Houston as a police officer for more than 30 years, just a few days shy of 31 years. Along with Officer Jeffrey, Sergeant Michael Vance was also injured. He is recovering, expected to pull through, but the two of them were shot while serving arrest warrants in Northeast Houston last week. A little bit earlier, I mentioned his partner, his former partner, Chris Helton, and I want you to hear from him. You heard from his daughter Lacey about who he was to her as father, as Grandpa Bill, to her children. Here's what he was like as an officer serving Houston Police. I apologize. We're having some audio issues there. Hopefully we can get that resolved, and so you can hear from Officer Chris Helton about what it was like to be partners with Officer Jeffrey. As we watch from Air 11 this live procession from Tomball to Grace Church, Houston. It sounds like we fixed the issue with Officer Helton's interview. We'll listen to it now.
Partners, we worked out of South Central for 6 years. We were together. And I was the young guy, and he took me under his wing and, taught me a lot of good stuff. And, the guy just was nonstop. He was always there early and wanted to stay late. And he just loved this job. He was etched for this job. If you look at police officer in the dictionary, it would be his face. So he's just a tremendous guy, loved his family. You know, flew all over. He's got family all over in the United States, and you know, was going in to visit them, and yeah, just tremendous guy.
How will you remember him?
You know, Bill was there when my first son was born. Sorry. Bill was there. I mean, he's when my first son was born, and you know, I've got pictures of us getting the award ceremony, and my youngest son is dressed up in a police uniform and everything like that, and you know, and Bill was just as proud as my son. Come to his football games, loved both my boys, and even though he lived on the other side, he would travel to come see us, and he just, his memory is beyond what HPD can ever I mean,
He was more than just HPD.
yes, he was. I mean, but the guy, he lived, sleep, eat. He was a police officer through and through. So
His daughter was telling me about his laugh.
yeah. Bill always, he was a hard guy to crack, but once you got him to crack, he was you can get him going pretty good. So he's just a tremendous guy. I can't say enough about him, and I love the guy. So, you know, he was a brother to me.
Joining us, that was former partner of Officer Jeffrey, Officer Chris Helton. We're giving you a live look via Air 11 at the procession taking Senior Officer William Bill Jeffrey from Klein Funeral Home in Tomball to Grace Church, Houston, where his funeral service will be held later this morning. After that service at 10 a.m., his body will be escorted back up to Klein Funeral Home, taking a different route. Instead of looping around Beltway 8, it will instead shoot right through downtown, providing two opportunities for the people of Houston to pay their respects to Officer Jeffrey. As we're watching, I did want to mention Officer Jeffrey's family. It's something that's come up over and over again. Mayor Turner, Chief Finner, speaking about the strength of the family. You heard from Officer Jeffrey's former partner, Chris Helton. His wife, Suzanne, whom he leaves behind, is also a former HPD officer. She just retired last year. Chief Finner said they were in the process of building their dream home. So this is just a huge hit for not only Officer Jeffrey's blood family, but his blue family as well. Again, serving almost 31 years, just days shy of 31 years as an officer with Houston Police, and just 54 years old. Killed last week serving 2 narcotics warrants in Northeast Houston. He was shot along with Sergeant Michael Vance, who is expected to recover from his injuries. But a huge loss for the Houston Police Department. Mayor Turner, Chief Finner, repeating that Officer Jeffrey was the best of the best. We're going to continue to follow along with this procession as it makes its way to Grace Church, Houston, along the Gulf Freeway, just south of Beltway 8, ahead of the service at 10 a.m. I wonder if we can pull up that route again in case folks are just joining in for our live coverage, so you can plan your morning commute around it and or pay your respects to Officer Jeffrey. There we go. So on the route there, they have taken 249 from Tomball down to Beltway 8, taking Beltway 8 all the way around, just a huge section of Houston, down to the Gulf Freeway, taking the Dixie Farm exit, and then looping back. That's where you'll find Grace Church, Houston. Now, on the way back, the route looks a little different. Instead of doing the full Beltway 8 loop, a procession is going, or a police escort is going to take Officer Jeffrey's body through downtown Houston, and the Houston Avenue exit. Part of that group will break off and continue on to Tomball, but the official motorcade will end at the Houston Avenue exit. You see a tribute there. Hard to see what agency, but it looks like a fire department. Lights on, saluting Officer Jeffrey as he makes his way to Grace Church, Houston. Really beautiful thing about this route is how many different jurisdictions it travels through, and provides an opportunity for a lot of the other agencies in the Houston area to say their goodbyes as well. We do know that there is going to be a large law enforcement and first responder presence at Grace Church, Houston as well. But a reminder, the public is welcome, but there will be COVID-19 restrictions in place, and law enforcement will get priority seating. So probably the safest and best way to watch will be here online. We'll have some coverage on KHOU on air as well, but we'll carry it across all of our platforms here. So whatever you're watching, Facebook, YouTube, Roku, Fire Stick, you'll have the opportunity to watch those services and then watch them back later if you have to get your day started and step away for some reason. Those bright lights in the darkness. It's one of the ways Chief Finner described Officer Jeffrey. So it's pretty fitting that we see those lights flashing as they escort his body this morning. I'm going to pop onto Facebook right now and see what kind of comments are here. Diane says, thank you for your service. Samantha says, RIP, officer, thank you for your service and protection. Donna writes, RIP, may God be with your family and fellow officers. When we learned of Officer Jeffrey's death last week, there was an outpouring on social media from local leaders to national politicians, law enforcement agencies from all over the state, and the public. In more than 30 years serving Houston, Officer Jeffrey had interacted with a lot of folks in Houston. He lived here with his wife Suzanne, who was also a former officer, raised his daughter Lacey here. A lot of deep connections within the Houston community. I want to show you some of those comments that we saw last week when we learned of Officer Jeffrey's death. again, just an outpouring. This is the chief of police in, I believe, San Diego, writing, "Our condolences and prayers go out to Houston police, family, and friends for their loss." This was at Thursday's Texans game. Our Matt Musil documented this moment of silence for Officer Jeffrey. Arlington Police extending love and deepest condolences to the family and friends of Officer Jeffrey and the entire Houston community. Chief Finner here describing Officer Jeffrey as the best of the best, saying he left a legacy with HPD that will never be forgotten. Flower Mound Police Department sending sincerest prayers and support to brothers and sisters within the Houston Police Department and the family and friends of Officer Jeffrey. Here's Fort Worth, who asked folks to join them in praying for the family and friends of Officer Jeffrey. A lot of these came out minutes, hours after we learned of Officer Jeffrey's death. Here's one from Friendswood, extending the deepest condolences to Officer Jeffrey's brothers and sisters in blue. Also praying for the recovery of Sergeant Michael Vance, who was also shot, serving that warrant with Officer Jeffrey. So many examples. That's just a handful of what we saw. Galena Park. We'll share more of those throughout the morning as we watch from Air 11. Senior Officer Bill Jeffrey being escorted from Tomball along Beltway 8 to Grace Church, Houston. Now they expect to arrive at the church around 7. They got started right at 6, and they're making pretty good time cruising along Beltway 8. Once they get to the church, we expect to hear from HPD's Major Offenders Division. Again, that's the division with which Officer Jeffrey served. They, along with honor guards, will escort his casket inside, and then they will stand guard over his casket until the service begins at 10 a.m. After that service, Officer Jeffrey will receive full police honors. We got a little bit of a briefing about what to expect at the funeral service. We know we'll hear from HPD Chaplain Vincent Johnson, Chief Troy Finner will speak, Assistant Chief Ernest Garcia, Mayor Sylvester Turner, and Major Offenders Division Commander Ronald Bozo will all be involved in the service, which you can watch right here, whatever venue you're watching on. If you're watching on Facebook, on khou.com, on YouTube, Fire Stick, Roku. Then after the service, after he receives full honors, police will escort Officer Jeffrey back to the funeral home, taking I-45 through Houston. Again, that motorcade will kind of break off. The official motorcade ends at Houston Avenue, but the smaller group will keep going up to Tomball. On Facebook, Yuri writes, "RIP, grace and consolation for his family." Bruce is watching from Melbourne, Australia. He says, "RIP, Bill." Mike just writes, "So sad, RIP, sir." So far this morning, we haven't heard from Chief Finner. We don't expect to hear from him until the service itself. But I did want to play part of an interview. We heard from him last Wednesday as Officer Jeffrey's body was being taken to the funeral home in Tomball. And Chief Finner was asked what effect Officer Jeffrey's death had on the Houston Police Department.
We're here, we're standing strong together as one department, one city, and all of our partners and other departments. I'm just proud. I'm proud of first responders. And that's what I want to communicate.
You heard Chief there saying that the department was strong. He has also said multiple times that the Jeffrey family is so strong. Again, his wife, Suzanne, a former HPD officer. You heard from his daughter, Lacey, a little bit earlier. If you're just joining us and you haven't heard from Lacey, I definitely want to play that again for y'all, because she is just an incredible example of strength and grace in what is, and I imagine, incredibly difficult time for her family. But she wanted people to know about her dad, about the man she described as Superman, who was called GB, Grandpa Bill, by her kids, and whose laugh she says she will miss. He was supposed to come visit her in Austin last weekend, she said. But his life was taken a week ago today.
His laugh, he was very loud. Anyone that knew him, you would hear him from a mile away. I just want everyone to know that he was an amazing man that would have done anything for this city, and that this city lost their absolute best police officer today.
He lived for his job. He loved to protect the city.
He absolutely loved to protect the city, but he loved his family more than anything. He was GB, Grandpa Bill, and my daughter is going to miss him every single day. I want everyone to strive to be just like him. I want everyone to follow in his footsteps and to spend every moment that they are in this city protecting it the way that they should, and I want them to be more careful than he was. But I want everyone to know that he was a leader and to remember everything that he stood for. I'm going to miss him every single day for the rest of my life. And his friends and his family and his teammates are going to miss him every day for the rest of his life. He was a one-of-a-kind man. Everyone knew him, everybody loved him. The bad guys not so much, but everyone that knew him loved him. He was supposed to come and see me in Austin this week. He was supposed to come watch my daughter for me, because I had things to do. He was supposed to be here this week. The last thing he told me is, "I'll see you sometime this week, I love you." And now I don't ever get to see him again.
That was Lacey Jeffrey, the daughter of Senior Officer William Bill Jeffrey, talking about her dad, who she describes as Superman, a one-of-a-kind man. She asked that we all strive to be like him, to protect our city, to make our city safer. You're taking a live look at Air 11 right now of the procession escorting Officer Jeffrey's body from Tomball to Grace Church, Houston, along the Gulf Freeway. We've seen a handful of agencies paying tribute to Officer Jeffrey along the way. That's something you can do as well if there is a safe place for you to park. Pay your respects to him as his body is escorted. He will also be making a trip back up to Tomball after the service. The service is slated to start at 10 this morning, and we're going to have live coverage that you can watch here. The public is invited to attend the funeral in person, but just know that COVID-19 restrictions are in place, so first priority will go to HPD officers, other law enforcement, other first responders who also wish to attend the funeral. This route is looping along Beltway 8, making its way to the Gulf Freeway. We anticipate they will arrive there right around 7 o'clock this morning. It is a lengthy route, but it's an opportunity for the public and for different agencies to honor Officer Jeffrey, who lost his life in the line of duty a week ago today. He, along with Sergeant Michael Vance, were serving narcotics warrants in Northeast Houston when they were both shot, and Officer Jeffrey passed away. Over the past week, we've heard from Police Chief Finner multiple times about the kind of officer, the kind of man Officer Jeffrey was. Finner describing him as the best of the best, as an example of what an officer should be. His former partner, Chris Helton, also said, if you look up the word police officer in the dictionary, you'd see his face next to it. I believe we're in the memorial area now as the procession makes its way to Grace Church, Houston. As it does, we're paying tribute to Officer Jeffrey this morning, but there are also a lot of thoughts and prayers going out to Sergeant Michael Vance, who was also injured. Here's what Chief Finner said about Vance and what Sergeant Vance had to say when the chief went to visit.
He just wants us to stand strong, and I told him we got it. And my message to him was, buddy, you get better, you get stronger, get your rest. But he's a cop, and he's also a supervisor. He's worried about his troops, and he's worried about Jeffrey's family. So I told him we got it from here.
Chief Finner there sharing that conversation with Sergeant Vance, that even as he was recovering in the hospital after being shot, very concerned about his fellow officers, about Officer Jeffrey, about Officer Jeffrey's family. That family is one that has been described as so strong. And you heard from Lacey Jeffrey just a few minutes ago. Here's what Chief Finner said about the Jeffrey family.
It's amazing, and I can tell you, can you imagine going through this? A daughter and a wife and an extended family, and they got smiles, and it's just strength and hugs. They have some anger, and we'll deal with that a little bit later, but they're just exhibiting love and support to us when they're in such pain, and I just think that's a beautiful thing. And I want Houston, I want our nation to know how great this family is, and it don't surprise me. Knowing Bill, it don't surprise me.
Chief Finner talking about the strength of the Jeffrey family. His Officer Jeffrey's wife, whom he leaves behind, a former HPD officer herself, just retired last year, and then you heard from his daughter Lacey a moment ago. I want to share a couple comments that are coming in on Facebook. Luisa says, RIP, praying for his family. Thank you for your service, sir. Connie says, RIP, thank you for your service. Heaven has a new angel. Monica writes, RIP to a hero. Prayers for his friends and family. You are taking a live look at Air 11 making its way along Beltway 8, about halfway through its trek from Tomball to Grace Church, Houston on the Gulf Freeway, where the funeral service for Officer Jeffrey will be held at 10 o'clock this morning. This is unfortunately a scene where we've described too often. You can see some flashing lights on the shoulder there, or I think that may be the feeder road, along with the procession, the motorcade escorting Officer Jeffrey's body. Now, along with Air 11 following the procession, we also have a crew at Grace Church, Houston, ready for their arrival. Michelle Choi has been reporting live from there all morning ahead of the funeral service for a man who, by all accounts, was beloved within Houston Police Department. His daughter says everyone who met him loved him, with the exception of, she says, the bad guys. But anyone else,
My dad always thought he was Superman.
absolutely fell in love with Officer Jeffrey. This is a live look at Grace Church, Houston, where officers are standing by for the arrival of Officer Jeffrey's body ahead of his funeral service at 10 a.m. When he arrives, members of HPD's Major Offenders Division, that is the division with which Officer Jeffrey served, as well as honor guards, will escort his casket inside, and then they will stand guard until the service begins at 10 o'clock this morning. It's going to be an emotional day for Houston Police and for those who knew Officer Jeffrey well. We're going to stream his service here on khou.com, as well as on all our social media feeds. It is something you will be able to watch back as well if you have to go to work, take the kids to school, anything like that. Of course, we'll also have coverage on KHU 11 News at noon, as well as the 411 KHU 11 News at 5, 6, and 10 o'clock tonight as the community says goodbye to Officer Bill Jeffrey. I do want to share with you one more clip from his daughter Lacey about the memories she has of her father.
My dad always thought he was Superman. He loved this job more than anything. Well, I say that. He loved this job right underneath his family. He wanted nothing more than to keep the city safe, and that was his number one goal. And today he died doing what he loved doing the most.
How do you want your dad to be remembered?
I want everyone to know that my dad wasn't just a cop. While he did die doing what he loved doing, first and foremost, he was a family man. He was a brother. He was a husband. He was a dad. And he was a grandpa. And my daughter will not get to remember her grandfather the way that she deserves, because a judge let this criminal back out, and here we are today.
This morning, we are remembering Senior Officer William Bill Jeffrey, who will be laid to rest today. His funeral service at 10 o'clock, but ahead of that, you're getting a live look from Air 11 as his body is escorted from Klein Funeral Home to Grace Church, Houston, where that service is set to begin at 10 this morning. An emotional day for Houston Police, for his family, for those who knew him. You can see some more flashing lights on the feeder there. Agencies all along the route paying their respects to Officer Jeffrey, a 30-year veteran of the force. In fact, he was just a few days away from celebrating 31 years as an officer with Houston Police. 54 years old, leaving behind his wife Suzanne, a former HPD officer herself, just retired last year, and his daughter Lacey, from whom you just heard. Her daughter knew Officer Jeffrey as GB, as Grandpa Bill. Lacey describes Officer Jeffrey as someone everyone loved, with the exception of bad guys. And she encouraged everyone to strive to be like him, to make our community safer, to make our community better. She called him a one-of-a-kind man, and Mayor Turner, Chief Finner, both used the words best of the best to describe Officer Jeffrey. He died in the line of duty last week. He and Sergeant Michael Vance were shot by a suspect as they served narcotics warrants in Northeast Houston. Again, just shy of 31 years on the job. This procession that you're watching live from Air 11 is making its way pretty rapidly along Beltway 8 down to the Gulf Freeway, where it's going to do a loop on Dixie Farm Road to Grace Church, Houston. A few minutes ago, we gave you a live look at the church, but I want to share some comments that we saw pouring in on social media after news of Officer Jeffrey's death came out. George P. Bush writing, "Officer Jeffrey gave his life to protect Texans today. His sacrifice will never be forgotten. Praying for his family and the Houston Police Department during this difficult time. Rest in peace, officer." We're seeing so many very similar comments on our Facebook page. These were just a couple from Twitter that we saw, lifting the families in prayer. May God pour his abundant grace, mercy, and love to the families and to all in law enforcement. Peace be with you. Teresa wrote, "Thank you for your service. My condolences to his family and the Houston Police Department. Prayers to the other surviving officer," that's Sergeant Michael Vance, "and to all the officers of the city of Houston. Rest in peace, Officer Jeffrey." Here on Facebook, Timber writes, "Condolences and prayers for his family and friends." Kim writes, "Sincere condolences." More from Twitter from last week. Patricia says, "I am so sorry for your loss. This is such a sad thing that happened. God be with you and the family and give you the strength you need to get through this most difficult time in life." Strength is something the Jeffrey family has in abundance, according to Chief Finner, and you can hear it in his daughter Lacey. Just an incredibly strong family, but that does not make this past week any easier, or this morning, as they say their goodbyes to a man they knew as husband, as father, as GB, Grandpa Bill. Wanda wrote, "So sad to hear this. Condolences to all of his family and his HPD family. Thanks to all the officers risking their lives to keep everyone safe." This tweet comes from the chief of the Los Angeles Police Department, writing, "We stand in support of the men and women of the Houston, Texas Police Department as they mourn the loss of Officer Bill Jeffrey, and pray for the full recovery of his partner." It's Sergeant Michael Vance. Now, a little earlier, we heard from Officer Jeffrey's former partner, Chris Helton. I wonder if we can bring that back, just so you can hear about the kind of police officer Officer Jeffrey was.
Bill and I were partners. We worked out of South Central for 6 years. We were together. I was the young guy, and he took me under his wing and, taught me a lot of good stuff. And, The guy just was nonstop. He was always there early and wanted to stay late. And he just loved this job. He was etched for this job. If you look at police officer in the dictionary, it would be his face. So he's just a tremendous guy. Loved his family. Flew all over. He's got family all over in the United States, and was going in to visit them, and just tremendous guy.
How will you remember him?
Bill was there when my first son was born. Sorry. Bill was there. I mean, he's when my first son was born, and I've got pictures of us getting the award ceremony, and my youngest son is dressed up in a police uniform and everything like that, and and Bill was just as proud as my son. Come to his football games, loved both my boys, and even though he lived on the other side, he would travel to come see us, and he just his memory is beyond what HPD can ever
He was more than just HPD.
Yes, he was. I mean, but the guy, he lived, sleep, eat. He was a police officer through and through. So
his daughter was telling me about his laugh.
Yeah. Bill always, he was a hard guy to crack, but once you got him to crack, he was you can get him going pretty good. So he's just a tremendous guy. I can't say enough about him, and I love the guy. He was a brother to me.
That was Officer Chris Helton, former partner of Officer Bill Jeffrey. And on this morning, when this whole of Houston is saying goodbye to a 30-year veteran of the force, what a spectacular sunrise. Beautiful shot of Houston. At 10 o'clock this morning, the funeral service for Officer Jeffrey will begin. But before then, his body is being escorted from Tomball, from Klein Funeral Home, down to Grace Church, Houston, where that service will be held. We have a crew awaiting his arrival at Grace Church, Houston. Michelle Choi has been live there all morning for KHEU 11. They're expected to arrive probably in the next 10 minutes or so. Once they do, members of HPD's Major Offenders Division and honor guards will escort Officer Jeffrey's flag-draped casket inside the church, and they're going to stand guard over it until the service begins. I know so many of you are streaming, watching this here with us, and sharing your sympathies, your condolences with Officer Jeffrey's family, both blood and blue. Donna writes, "May God be with your family and fellow officers." Samantha says, "Thank you for your service and protection." Again, Officer Jeffrey served the city of Houston for more than 30 years. He was just a little shy of 31 years on the force. And the wife he leaves behind, Suzanne, was also a Houston police officer who had just retired last year. When we learned of Officer Jeffrey's death, departments like Pearland Police tweeted, "Pearland PD is heartbroken to learn of the loss of Officer Jeffrey, who was killed in the line of duty this morning serving a warrant. We will continue to pray for Officer Jeffrey's family and friends and the brave men and women of the Houston Police. We saw so many departments throughout Texas. Pflugerville ISD's police department tweeting, sending our condolences and prayers for peace and comfort to the family of Senior Police Officer Bill Jeffrey and our Blue family. Rest easy, brother. We have it from here. Congressman Brian Babin tweeted, my heartfelt condolences are with the family of Officer Bill Jeffrey, who lost his life in the line of duty. I continue to pray for Officer Vance's swift recovery. Sergeant Vance was the other officer who was injured, shot while serving those warrants last week. Congressman Babin writes, may we never forget the courage of those officers. Round Rock Police say this is a tragic reminder of the human behind the badge. Houston Police lost one of its own. Officer Bill Jeffrey, 30-year veteran, killed while serving a warrant. Another officer, that would be Officer Vance, is undergoing surgery and is expected to recover. We heard from Chief Finner a little earlier about his conversation when he visited Sergeant Vance in the hospital. And the chief said Sergeant Vance was more concerned about how everyone else on the force was doing, how Officer Jeffrey and his family were doing beyond his own recovery. It speaks to the character of Sergeant Vance as well as Officer Jeffrey, who is described as the best of the best. That comes from Chief Finner as well as Mayor Sylvester Turner. His former partner Chris Helton says that if you look up the word police officer in a dictionary, you see his face right there. That beyond just being a brother in blue, he was there for his partner's first son's birth, that he attended his son's football games, hearing from Lacey Jeffrey, Officer Jeffrey's daughter, just about the grandfather that he was, the father he was. She encouraged everyone to strive to be like him. Air 11 showing the procession. I believe it's... Have we reached the Gulf Freeway?
I don't think so.
Approaching the Gulf Freeway, I believe. Once they do, it's going to be a quick jaunt on there. They'll go south on the Gulf Freeway, take the Dixie Farm exit, and then do a U-turn around to reach Grace Church Houston. Here's a live look from there. Michelle Choi reporting live for us all morning from Grace Church Houston ahead of this funeral service, which is slated to begin at 10 a.m. After the service, Officer Jeffrey's body will be escorted back to Tomball. The route will be different. So this morning, the procession went from 249 to Beltway 8 all the way around to the Gulf Freeway. Instead, on the way back to Tomball, the procession will go straight through the heart of Houston on I-45. At Houston Avenue, that's where the official motorcade ends, and a portion will break off, and then a small contingent will continue back up to Tomball. Oh, wow. A tribute to Officer Jeffrey along the route, those flashing red and blue lights. The officers standing next to their vehicles. As Officer Jeffrey is escorted past them. That's one of so many examples of tributes we have seen along this route this morning. Agencies paying their respects for a 30-year veteran lost in the line of duty a week ago today. The procession continues on toward the Gulf Freeway. Just saw them pass the toll plaza there. When they arrive at the church, we do expect to hear from a representative of HPD or the Major Offenders Division ahead of the service. We will not hear from Chief Finner before the service, though. We do know that he will be involved in the service itself, though. So will Mayor Sylvester Turner, Assistant Chief Ernest Garcia, Major Offenders Division Commander Ronald Boza, and Chaplain Vincent Johnson. You can watch that service right here, wherever you're streaming this. You'll be able to watch that service. We'll also have complete coverage throughout the day, starting on KHU 11 News at noon through 4, 5, 6, and 10 o'clock tonight. If for some reason you have to break away, we will also have it on khou.com for you to watch back, or on our YouTube channel. That's always a great resource to watch some of this stuff at length. It is just past 7 o'clock this morning, 3 hours before the service, the funeral service for Officer Jeffrey. This procession making its way to Grace Church, Houston, where honor guards are standing by, waiting for the arrival of Officer Jeffrey's casket. Even over the course of the past hour, we have seen the number of officers gathering outside increase. We expect there's going to be a pretty significant law enforcement presence there today, not just law enforcement, but first responders as well. COVID restrictions are in place, though, so the crowd will be more limited than we've seen in years past. And again, the public is welcome to attend, but there may not be room because of first priority for first responders and other police officers. It sounds like we're about 10 minutes away from their arrival, making that trip all the way from Tomball, from Klein Funeral Home, down 249, around Beltway 8, and eventually onto the Gulf Freeway to make it to Grace Church, Houston. I want to go over what we can expect during the service. We know Chief Finner and Mayor Turner will make remarks. We're also going to hear again from his daughter Lacey, who just exhibited incredible strength and poise when talking about her father last Monday. His friend Paul, Officer Jeffrey's friend Paul, will also speak. We'll hear a message from Pastor Charles Lowry. And final honors from Chaplain Johnson. Throughout the course of this procession, we have seen the sunrise. When it first began, it was dark and you could see those lights flashing in the darkness. Now the sun is up and we are watching the procession make its way to Grace Church, Houston. Look at that sunrise. Beautiful and blue on the morning when we pay our respects and honor Senior Officer William Bill Jeffrey, 30-year veteran of the Houston Police Force, 54 years old, husband, father, grandfather, and brother to so many on the Houston Police Force. On Facebook, we have some more comments flowing in from those of you who are watching. Sandra writes, "This is so sad. Our prayers and condolences to the Jeffrey family, fellow officers, friends. May you feel the comfort and peace of God surrounding you today and always." Armida sends prayers to his family and friends. So does Kimberly. Jill writes prayers going out to his family. Mandy writes, "Heartbroken. My prayers to his family, sisters, and brothers in blue and friends." A lot of prayers. A lot of you are commenting with prayers this morning. Some other comments we saw on social media last week, like this tweet from Round Rock Police, one of so many Texas agencies that express condolences. Round Rock wrote, "In a tragic reminder of the human behind the badge, Houston Police lost one of its own this morning." Round Rock PD stands with you. We saw tweets from San Diego's chief, from LA's chief, from Arlington, just not just all over the state, but from all over the country. Here's San Diego's chief writing, "Our condolences and prayers go out to Houston Police, family, and friends for their loss of Senior Officer William Bill Jeffrey. We also wish Sergeant Michael Vance a full recovery." Sergeant Vance was also shot as the two were serving narcotics warrants in Northeast Houston last Monday. Senator Cruz writing, "Heidi and I extend our most sincere sympathies to the family of the Houston police officer who was killed in the line of duty. Please join us in praying for a swift and full recovery for the HPD officer, Sergeant Vance, who was wounded in this morning's tragic events." That tweet was from last week. The procession has now made its way onto the Gulf Freeway. And it won't be long now before they exit on Dixie Farm Road and loop around to Grace Church, Houston. There's that exit. Awaiting Officer Jeffrey are honor guards and members of the Major Offenders Division with which he served, the division with which he served. There you go. Live look at Grace Church, Houston. A lot of hugs. I'm sure there will be a lot of tears for the loss of a 30-year veteran of the force. 30 years serving Houston. And when he was killed in the line of duty, he served on the Major Offenders Division. His daughter says anyone who met him loved him, except, she says, the bad guys. I keep bringing up that Chief Finner and Mayor Turner describe him as the best of the best, because I feel like that is such a strong testament to the character of Officer Jeffrey. Someone recognized by his peers, by his former partner, as being the ultimate police officer. If you looked up the word police officer in the dictionary, there would be Officer Jeffrey's photo next to it. But beyond that, just being an incredible husband, father, grandfather, and friend. His former partner described how Officer Jeffrey was there at the hospital when his first son was born, how he would go watch his partner's sons play football. His daughter shared he was supposed to be in Austin this past weekend, helping her care for her daughter, his granddaughter, who called him GB, Grandpa Bill. Officers are standing by now for the arrival of the procession, which we expect momentarily. Our live crew there at Grace Church Houston, Michelle Choi, has been reporting live from there all morning on H-Town Rush, and will continue our coverage through the service, which starts at 10 o'clock. So we are about 3 hours away from the start of that service. You may wonder what happens in between once that procession arrives at the church and the service, the funeral service beginning. Officer Jeffrey's flag-draped casket will be guarded by honor guards until that happens. You have representatives from Houston Fire arriving. We anticipate a large contingent of first responders, Houston Police, yes, but also folks from other agencies all over the Houston area. As you can imagine, a 30-year veteran has had a lot of interactions over the course of his career. The procession is now arriving into the parking lot of Grace Church Houston. And we'll drive through a kind of gate created by those fire trucks. A salute from Houston Fire as the body of Senior Officer Bill Jeffrey arrives at Grace Church Houston. I was just gonna say, I'm gonna be quiet here for a moment so we can all take in this tradition. And with that, Senior Officer Bill Jeffrey's body is now inside Grace Church, Houston, where his funeral service will be held in just about 3 hours, coming up at 10 o'clock this morning. We're, of course, going to have live coverage of that funeral. We'll have live coverage of Officer Jeffrey's funeral ahead at 10 o'clock this morning. But for now, honor guards are standing by his flag-draped casket ahead of that service, when the community will be able to say goodbye to a 30-year veteran of Houston Police. We will pop back on here probably about 9:45 before the service begins. Before we leave, I do want to give you a reminder that after the service ends, a procession will go straight up I-45 through downtown Houston. The official motorcade will break off at Houston Avenue, and then a small contingent will head back to Tomball. We will join you again at 9:45 for the funeral service of Senior Officer Bill Jeffrey.